The final eulogy for her husband, Liam, was a cold, brittle thing, spoken into a wind that stole the words before they could offer any comfort. Elara stood by the raw earth of the grave, the black wool of her dress a stark wound against the gray sky of Providence Gulch. She felt the eyes of the town on her, a mixture of pity and calculation. She was 23, a widow, and she was not blood. That was the fact that mattered most. Liam's family, the formidable pillars of the town, stood apart from her, a tight knot of dark coats and harder expressions. After the last mourner had drifted away, leaving only the scent of damp soil and finality, Liam's older brother Thomas approached her. He did not offer a hand or a word of solace. His face was carved from the same hard granite as the surrounding hills, his eyes holding the glint of ledgers and law, not loss. He held a folded paper in his gloved hand. "Elara," he began, his voice flat, devoid of warmth, "the family has discussed your situation. Liam left no will naming you specifically. As you are not of our bloodline, the main homestead reverts to the family trust. It is the law." She said nothing. She had expected this. In the 2 years she had been married to Liam, she had learned the cold arithmetic of his family's affections. She was an outsider, a woman from a poorer territory, and with Liam gone, she was a loose thread to be snipped. "We are not without charity," Thomas continued, a phrase that felt like a slap. "We have decided to grant you the deed to the Dry Knoll property. It was Liam's first purchase, a sentimental folly. It is yours, free and clear." He pushed the paper into her hand. The paper was cold, stiff. The Dry Knoll. A wave of murmurs had passed through the town when Liam bought it years ago. It was a worthless patch of wind-scoured rock and scrub, named for the deep, stone-lined well the original settlers had dug a generation before, only to abandon it when it never yielded a single drop of water. It was a joke, a piece of land so useless no one even bothered to graze sheep on it. "And this," Thomas said, pressing a few heavy coins into her palm, "for your passage, east perhaps. There is nothing for you here now." The coins were her severance, 10 silver dollars. Enough for a coach ticket to nowhere in particular, or for a sack of flour and a good axe. He turned his back then, a final dismissive act that severed the last tie binding her to this place. The family followed him, their departure a silent, unified judgment. She was left alone with a deed to a hole in the ground, $10, the worn dress she stood in, and an ache in her chest so vast it felt like the sky might fall into it. The town watched from a distance. She saw Mr. Gable, the mercantile owner, shake his head slowly. She saw the mayor's wife purse her lips in what could have been sympathy or disapproval. They all expected her to take the coach. They expected her to disappear. But as the wind cut through her thin dress, a different feeling began to smolder beneath the grief and the shock. It was a hard, stubborn coal of defiance. Liam had loved her. He had seen a strength in her that his family refused to acknowledge. He had taught her to set a snare, to read the weather in the clouds, to find north by the moss on the trees. He would not want her to run. She closed her fist around the coins. Her knuckles were white. She looked not toward the coach station at the east end of town, but west, toward the unforgiving hills where the Dry Knoll waited. She would not take their charity. She would not flee. She walked to Gable's Mercantile, her back straight, her face a mask of calm resolve. The whispers followed her, but she did not hear them. She heard only Liam's voice, a faint echo telling her to endure. Inside the store, the pot-bellied stove radiated a heat that felt like a lie. Mr. Gable watched her with cautious eyes. "The coach leaves at dawn, missus," he offered, his tone gentle but firm. "I'll need a good axe," she said, her voice clear and steady. "The best one you have. And a shovel, a bucket, 50 feet of rope, a sack of beans, a sack of flour, and all the salt you'll sell me for what's left." Gable blinked, his professional kindness faltering. He looked at the few dollars in her hand, then back at her face. He saw the foolishness of it, the suicide of it. But he also saw something else in her eyes, something that made him stop his protest before it began. He nodded slowly and began to gather her things. She was not buying passage, she was buying a chance. The journey to the dry knoll was a penance. The land rose steadily from the relative shelter of the valley, and with every step the wind grew more personal, more malicious. It clawed at the heavy sacks slung over her shoulder, trying to rip them from her grasp. The weight of the axe and shovel dug into her bones, a constant, grinding pain. The landscape was a study in brown and gray, a tapestry of dead grass and skeletal trees clinging to stony soil. It was a place that had given up. By the time she saw the knoll, the sun was a weak, watery smear in the western sky, and her body was a single, screaming nerve of exhaustion. It was just as she remembered from the one time Liam had brought her here, a slight, barren rise in the terrain, distinguished only by the ring of dark, heavy stones that marked the mouth of the well. The wind howled over the rise, unimpeded, a physical force that seemed intent on scouring the very rock clean of life. She dropped her supplies, her muscles giving out at last. She sank to her knees and looked at her inheritance. The well was a black, circular mouth in the earth, about 4 feet across. The stones lining its edge were perfectly fitted, the work of patient, hopeful men who had been defeated. It was a monument to failure. This was it. This was all she had. A wave of despair so profound it was nauseating washed over her. The town was right. Thomas was right. This was a grave, not a home. The cold was already seeping through her clothes, a deep, predatory chill that promised a slow, merciless death. Tears froze on her cheeks, stinging like nettles. For a long, silent moment, she allowed herself to believe it was over. She could just lie down and let the cold take her. It would be easier. But the wind was a relentless bully. It pushed and shoved, denying her even the peace of surrender. Seeking a moment's respite, she crawled to the edge of the well and peered down. It was a tube of darkness. She could not see the bottom. Driven by a primal need to escape the wind's assault, she tied her new rope securely around one of the heavy capstones, tested it with all her weight, and then, with a deep breath that felt like swallowing glass, she began to lower herself into the hole. The descent was terrifying. The rope burned her raw hands. The darkness swallowed her. But as she went deeper, something miraculous happened. The roar of the wind faded, replaced by an unnerving, profound silence. 10 feet down, 15, 20. Her feet touched solid ground. She let go of the rope and stood in absolute blackness, her heart hammering against her ribs, and then she felt it. The air was still, utterly, completely still. More than that, it was not cold, not warm, but free of the biting chill that permeated the world above. It was the dead, neutral air of a cellar. She ran her trembling hands along the wall. The stones were smooth, cold but not frozen. As her fingers explored the curved surface, they brushed against something damp. She pressed closer. A tiny, almost imperceptible film of moisture coated the stones in one section. A seep. It was not a gushing spring, but it was water, slow, patient, but there. She stood in the dark at the bottom of a failed well on a worthless piece of land, and for the first time since Liam's death, a flicker of something other than grief ignited within her. It was not hope, not yet. It was a more practical, more ferocious thing, an idea. The town saw a useless hole. She was standing inside 3 solid walls and a foundation. They saw a dry well. She felt the promise of water. They saw a wind-blasted hill. She was standing in a place the wind could not touch. The well was not a grave. It was a shield. The first task was to transform the vertical shaft into a horizontal living space. The well would be the entrance, the chimney, the beginning. She chose the south side of the well's base, where the earth felt slightly softer. With the shovel and the sharp edge of the axe head, she began to dig. The labor was a thing of singular, brutal focus. The ground was a dense composite of clay and packed soil, studded with rocks that fought her every inch. She would hack at the wall with the axe until her shoulders screamed, then pry the loosened dirt and stone away with the shovel, filling the bucket. Then came the agonizing process of hauling it, hand over hand, up the 20-foot rope to the surface, emptying it and lowering it back down. Each bucket was a victory. Each foot of space cleared was a triumph against the crushing weight of the earth. Her hands, soft from a life as a wife, were destroyed in the first 2 days. They blistered, the blisters broke, and the raw skin beneath bled. She tore strips from her petticoat to wrap them, but the dirt and grit worked their way in, turning the bindings into abrasive files. The pain was a constant fire, but she learned to live with it, to push past it. Her world shrank to the rhythmic scrape of metal on dirt, the groan of the rope, the burn in her muscles, and the slow, steady expansion of the darkness in front of her. She worked by the dim light that filtered down the well shaft during the day, and slept in the growing cavern at night, huddled in her thin blanket, her body aching with a fatigue so deep it was its own kind of numbness. After a week, she had carved out a space barely larger than a coffin. After 2, it was the size of a small closet. By the end of the first month, she had a chamber 10 feet by 10 feet, with a ceiling just high enough for her to stand upright. The earth she'd excavated formed a growing mound around the well's entrance, a testament to her relentless toil. Now came the challenge of structure. She needed a roof that would not collapse, and for that she needed wood. She climbed out of her hole and began to fell the tough, stringy pines that dotted the surrounding landscape. Each swing of the axe was a shock that traveled up her arms and into her spine. Her body was leaner now, corded with new muscle born of repetitive strain. She learned to read the lean of a tree, to cut a wedge that would guide its fall. She dragged the logs back to the well one by one, a slow, torturous process that left deep furrows in the earth. She laid the thickest logs across the top of her excavated chamber, their ends resting on the packed earth. Over these main beams she laid a lattice of smaller branches. The final step was the roof itself. She cut thick squares of sod from the ground, heavy with roots and soil, and hauled them to her dwelling. She laid them over the branch lattice, grass side up, packing them tightly together. It was a living roof, insulated, waterproof, and almost invisible from a distance. With the main shelter dug and roofed, she turned her attention to the systems that would mean the difference between survival and a slow death. Heat was the first priority. Winter was coming, its breath already visible in the morning frosts. She couldn't have an open fire in an earthen room. She needed a fireplace and a chimney. The well shaft was the answer. She chose a section of the well's original stone lining as the back of her hearth. Using the clay she'd dug out, mixed with water from her precious seep and dry grass for binder, she fashioned a crude but effective mortar. She built the sides of the fireplace with flat stones found nearby. For the chimney, she painstakingly mortared smaller, flatter stones into a channel that ran up the inside of the well wall, a flue that would draw the smoke up and out into the open air. The stone wall of the well would absorb the heat from the fire, becoming a thermal mass, a battery of warmth that would radiate back into her room long after the flames died down. Her water system was simpler. She used the shovel to deepen the area below the seep, creating a small basin. She then lined the entire basin with a thick layer of the purest clay she could find, packing it down until it was smooth and watertight. It was a tiny subterranean cistern. The water collected slowly, a drop at a time, but it was constant and pure, filtered by the earth itself. Every morning she would have a few gallons of clean, cold water waiting for her. Food was the next puzzle. Her beans and flour would not last forever. She needed a living pantry, and for that she had to return to Providence Gulch. She washed in the icy water of a nearby creek, mended her dress as best she could, and walked back into the town that had cast her out. Her arrival at Gable's Mercantile caused an immediate silence. She was thinner, her face weathered, her hands scarred and calloused. She looked feral, a creature of the wild hills. Mr. Gable stared at her hands, then at her eyes, which held a new, unreadable depth. "I need to buy a goat," she said, her voice raspy from disuse. "A pregnant nanny, if you know of one, and 3 laying hens." A low chuckle came from the corner of the store. It was Thomas. He was there with another rancher, and they both looked at her with open amusement. "A goat?" Thomas sneered, his voice loud enough for the whole store to hear. "What are you going to do with a goat, Alara? Keep it down that hole with you? They'll call you the Well Witch?" The men laughed. Alara's face remained impassive. She ignored him, keeping her eyes on Gable. "And a bag of grain. And more salt." She placed her last few coins on the counter. It was just enough. Mr. Gable, to his credit, met her gaze and nodded, his expression now one of grudging respect rather than pity. Leading a pregnant, stubborn goat and carrying a crate with 3 clucking hens back to the knoll was an ordeal. The mockery of the town followed her, a new nickname clinging to her like burrs: the Well Witch, the Dirt Bride, Thomas's Folly. They saw her purchase not as a plan, but as the final act of a madwoman. As she made her way back, a scruffy, bone-thin dog with 1 floppy ear began to follow her. It kept its distance, wary but persistent. When she finally reached her shelter, she left a small piece of salted bread near the entrance. The dog crept forward and ate it. That night, it curled up on the growing mound of earth by the well opening. She had a companion. She named him Boro. She expanded her underground home, digging a second, smaller chamber connected to the first. This would be for the animals. It was close enough that their body heat would contribute to the overall warmth of the dwelling, and their sounds, the soft bleating of the goat, the gentle clucking of the hens, were a comfort in the profound silence. Boro, her loyal guard, now had a warm place to sleep just inside the entrance. She had built more than a shelter. She had built a system, a tiny, self-contained world hidden beneath the earth. The town's scorn became a distant noise, like the wind she no longer had to endure. Thomas made one trip out to her land in the late fall. He stood on the edge of the well, peering down into the darkness where a faint light now flickered. He saw the neat pile of firewood, the securely covered entrance to her burrow, the mound of excavated earth that now acted as a windbreak. He saw the goat placidly chewing its cud nearby. He saw a project, a defiant act of insanity. "This is madness, Ilara," he called down, his voice echoing in the shaft. "Winter will kill you in this pit. The snows will bury you. Come back. Sarah needs help in the house. You can earn your keep." He was offering her a servant's life, a final chance to accept her place. From the darkness below, her voice came back, calm and clear. "I have my keep." He shook his head in disgust and left. It was the last time he would mock her. From then on, he simply ignored her existence, speaking of her as if she were already gone, a sad story to be told, as a warning against pride. As autumn bled into winter, life for Alara settled into a deep, quiet rhythm. Her world was circumscribed by the needs of her small ecosystem. She would wake in the dark, the air in her chamber cool but not cold. The first task was always the fire. She would add logs she had painstakingly cut, split, and seasoned, coaxing the embers back to life. The stone hearth would begin its slow work, drinking in the heat that it would share back for hours. With the fire crackling, she would milk the goat, her hands moving with a familiar, practiced efficiency. The warm, fresh milk was a luxury beyond price. She would then check on the hens, who had a small, straw-filled nesting box. Most days, one of them would have left her a single, perfect brown egg. These small gifts felt like miracles. Her days were a cycle of maintenance and preparation. She checked the snares she had set in the scrubland above, occasionally catching a rabbit, which meant precious meat for her and Boro. She tended to the animals, ensuring their small space was clean and they had enough feed and water. She worked on improving her home, smoothing the earthen walls and carving out small niches for storing supplies. The world outside grew colder, the days shorter, but inside her burrow life was consistent and ordered. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire, the soft sounds of the animals and the quiet padding of Boro's paws. She was utterly alone, but for the first time in her life she was not lonely. She was the sovereign of her small, warm kingdom. Before the great cold arrived, a smaller test came in the form of wolves, a lean, hungry pack driven down from the high country by an early snow caught the scent of her goat. One night, Boro erupted into a frenzy of deep, guttural barking. Ilara scrambled up the well shaft and peered over the edge. In the moonlight she could see them, a handful of gray, spectral shapes circling the knoll. They were cautious, but determined. A conventional log cabin with a wooden door might have been a target for their desperate hunger. But her home had no door to claw at, no windows to break. The entrance was a vertical drop they could not navigate. She was a fortress. She stayed up all night, keeping the fire bright to send a plume of smoke into the sky, while Boro's relentless barking kept the pack at bay. By morning they were gone. The test had been passed. Her design was not just a shelter, it was a defense. The blizzard arrived without preamble. One afternoon the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise, and then the world dissolved into a howling vortex of white. It was not a normal snowstorm. This was a different beast entirely. The wind screamed like a living thing, a predator hunting for any crack, any weakness. The temperature began to plummet, falling past 0, then 10 below, then 20. The old-timers in Providence Gulch would later call it the Great Cold of '83, a winter that broke records and spirits in equal measure. In town, the community's confidence shattered within the first 48 hours. The wind, a physical hammer, found its way through the chinking of the finest log homes. It blew snow through window frames and down chimneys, extinguishing fires. The cold was so intense that green wood, burned in desperation, offered little heat. Roofs, burdened by immense drifts of heavy snow, began to groan and sag. The great bell in the town's meeting hall cracked with a sound like a gunshot, silenced by the impossible cold. Livestock, even in their barns, began to die. Families huddled together in a single room, burning furniture to stay alive, their stockpiles of firewood vanishing at an alarming rate. The world outside their doors became an alien landscape, hostile and lethal. The very air felt sharp enough to cut a man's lungs. Providence Gulch, a town built on the principle of rugged self-sufficiency, was failing. But 20 feet below the surface of the dry knoll, Ilara's world remained an island of calm. The blizzard raged far above her. The tons of snow that fell on her sod roof only added to its insulation, sealing her in a silent white cocoon. The wind could not reach her. Its shriek was a distant, muffled rumor, a story from another world. Her ingenious fireplace, backed by the immense thermal mass of the stone well and the surrounding earth, burned with a steady, efficient heat. The stone wall was warm to the touch, a gentle radiator that kept the entire chamber at a comfortable, even temperature. Her goat and chickens were calm, shielded from the storm that was killing their kind all across the valley. Her tiny cistern continued its slow, patient drip, providing clean water. She had food, she had warmth, she had shelter. She was not fighting the storm. She was simply outside its reach. The system she had built with broken hands and relentless will was working perfectly. On the 4th day of the blizzard, when the temperature had settled at a soul-crushing 40 degrees below 0, a new sound broke the rhythm of her subterranean life. It was a frantic, muffled banging, coming not from the well shaft, but from directly above her. It was the sound of someone beating on the frozen earth of her roof. Boro shot to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest, and ran to the base of the well shaft, barking furiously. Ilara quieted him with a hand on his back. She listened. The banging was desperate, weak. Then a voice, torn apart by the wind and panic, filtered down. "Hello? Is anyone down there? Help us! Please, for the love of God, help!" It was a man's voice. She climbed the rope, her movements swift and sure. Poking her head over the stone lip of the well, she was blasted by a wall of unimaginable cold and wind-driven ice. The world was a maelstrom of white. A figure was on his knees a few feet away, covered in snow, his face a mask of ice and frozen tears. It was Thomas. He stared at her as if she were a ghost. He had been beating on the ground where he thought the entrance should be, having found the knoll more by memory than by sight. He was half frozen, his fine woolen coat offering little protection against this elemental fury. "Ilara?" he croaked, his voice cracking. You're alive." "What is it, Thomas?" she asked, her own voice steady against the storm's roar. His pride, the great, unshakable pillar of his life, crumbled. "It's my boy," he sobbed, the words freezing as they left his lips. "Leo, he has the lung fever. Our house. It's colder inside than out. The fire won't hold. We've burned everything. The doctor can't get through. He's dying, Ilara. My son is dying of the cold." She looked at the man who had cast her out, who had mocked her, who had sent her to this place with the expectation that she would fail and die. She saw not her brother-in-law, not her tormentor, but a terrified father on the verge of collapse. For a fleeting moment she remembered the sting of his laughter in the mercantile. She remembered the cold finality of his judgment. She looked at her own stores, her neat pile of wood, her sacks of grain, her preserved food. Helping him would put a strain on everything she had so carefully built. It was a risk. The choice was never really a choice, not for her. Liam would not have hesitated, and she was Liam's wife, whether his family acknowledged it or not. "Get down here before you freeze," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. She helped him into the well shaft, his limbs clumsy with cold. Once he was at the bottom, she followed. She did not wait for his thanks. She immediately went into action. She sat him by the fire, handing him a mug of hot, milky broth. Then she began to pack a small wooden sled. She loaded it with precious, seasoned firewood, thick logs that would burn hot and long. She added blankets woven from the goat's shed winter coat, another jar of broth, and some dried meat. "Boro and I will come with you," she said, pulling on her own rough-spun cloak. "We will bring them back here." The journey to the town was a battle against a frozen hell. The wind was a physical wall, and the snow was so deep it was like wading through sand. Boro, with his low center of gravity and keen sense of direction, led the way, a dark shape in the blinding white. Ilara and Thomas pushed the sled together, their breath crystallizing in the air, their bodies screaming in protest against the brutal cold. It was Thomas who faltered, his strength sapped by fear and exposure. It was Ilara, hardened by months of relentless labor, who urged him on, her quiet determination, a force stronger than the storm. When they finally reached Thomas's house, it was a tomb of ice. His wife, Sarah, was huddled over their small son, Leo, wrapped in every blanket they owned. The boy's breathing was a shallow, rattling whisper. Without a word, Ilara set to work, rebuilding the fire with her own dry wood, creating a small tent of blankets around the boy to trap the heat. Slowly, agonizingly, they prepared the family for the journey back. They wrapped Leo like a precious bundle and secured him to the sled. Sarah, her face a portrait of disbelief and dawning hope, followed Ilara's every instruction. The return trip was even harder, but now they were driven by a single, unified purpose. They were a rescue party, and their destination was the warm, beating heart of the world Ilara had built. The moment Thomas and Sarah descended the rope into Ilara's shelter was a moment of profound, shattering disbelief for them. They left a world of shrieking wind and lethal cold and entered a chamber of still, gentle warmth. The air smelled of wood smoke, damp earth, and living things. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, golden light on the smooth, earthen walls. Sarah's eyes, wide with shock, took in the impossible scene. The goat, nestled in a bed of clean straw in its own small alcove. The chickens, roosting quietly. She saw the small hand-carved shelves holding jars of preserved berries and roots. She saw the tiny, miraculous cistern, a skin of water shimmering in the firelight. This wasn't a hole. It wasn't a pit. It was a home, a sanctuary. It was more alive and more secure than their own fine house had ever been. Thomas stood stiffly, his face a ruin of conflicting emotions. He watched as Ilara gently took Leo from Sarah, checked the boy's breathing, and settled him into her own bed, a raised platform covered in straw and soft hides. She moved with a quiet competence that left no room for doubt. She was not a victim. She was a master of this domain she had created. He looked at the ingenious flue drawing the smoke perfectly up the well shaft. He looked at the neatly stacked firewood, the organized supplies, the calm animals. He finally understood. He hadn't sent her to a piece of worthless land. He had sent her to the one place, perhaps the only place, that could have survived this storm. His conventional wisdom, his fine house, his social standing, all of it had failed. Her quiet defiance, her back-breaking labor, her supposed foolishness, it had triumphed. He turned to face her, the shame so heavy he could barely stand. His voice, when it came, was a raw, broken whisper. "I sent you here to die," he said, the admission tearing through him. "I gave you nothing and told you it was charity, and you built a better world than any of us." He finally met her eyes, his own swimming with tears. "We were the fools. My God, Ilara, I was the fool." Ilara listened to his confession without a trace of triumph on her face. There was no victory in his humiliation, only sorrow for the path they had all traveled to reach this moment. She simply pulled a blanket tighter around the sleeping boy and looked back at Thomas and Sarah. "He needs to rest," she said, her voice soft but firm. "There is soup. Eat. You're safe here." Her grace was her only reply. It was more powerful than any accusation, more profound than any "I told you so." In the warmth of her earthen home, surrounded by the evidence of her impossible resilience, the family that had cast her out could only accept her quiet, unconditional mercy. When the great cold finally broke and the sun reappeared in a sky of wounded blue, the world was changed. Providence Gulch emerged from the blizzard, humbled and scarred. The story of what Ilara had done, carried back to the town by a profoundly changed Thomas, spread like wildfire. The mockery died overnight, replaced by a stunned, reverent silence. The derisive nicknames were retired, spoken no more. She was no longer the Well Witch. She was Ilara of the Knoll, a name now uttered with a deep and abiding respect. People began to make the journey to her home, not with pity, but with questions. They brought gifts, a side of bacon, a bolt of wool cloth, a new steel pot, and they asked for her advice. How did you build your chimney? How deep must a cellar be to hold back the frost? How did you know the earth would keep you warm? She shared her knowledge freely, explaining the principles of thermal mass, insulation, and wind protection with the simple, direct language of someone who had learned it not from books, but from her own hands. The following summer marked a shift in the very architecture of the valley. Several families, listening to Ilara's counsel, dug deep stone-lined cellars beneath their homes, insulating their foundations with packed earth and sod. Thomas, using his family's wealth, built a new barn for his livestock, its north wall buried halfway into a hillside, a direct copy of her design. The town, having faced its own fragility, began to build smarter, deeper, more resilient structures. Her methods, born of desperation, became the new wisdom of the region. Her story traveled with merchants and trappers to other settlements, becoming a frontier legend, the tale of the widow who was given a grave and turned it into a fortress. The dry knoll was no longer a symbol of failure, but a landmark of ingenuity and survival. Years passed. Alara's home grew with her. She expanded the underground chambers, creating more room for storage and animals. She cultivated a terraced garden on the south-facing slope of the knoll, the excavated earth having created a fertile, sheltered place for things to grow. She never remarried, finding a deep and satisfying peace in the life she had forged for herself. Boro grew old and gray at her side, and the goat's descendants still provided her with milk and warmth. She was not rich in the way the town understood it, but she was wealthy in security, in peace, and in the quiet strength that comes from knowing you can face the worst the world has to offer and not only survive, but thrive. Sometimes, in the warm light of a summer evening, she would sit at the stone entrance of her home, looking out over the valley. She saw the lights of the town, a town that had once cast her out and now looked to her as a source of strength. She had not sought vindication or revenge. She had sought only to live, and in doing so, she had built a legacy far more enduring than any stone house or family name. It was a legacy written in the earth itself, a quiet testament to the profound truth that what one person discards as worthless, another, with courage and vision, can transform into a kingdom.